We are actually using our best talent and best brains to economize on the world's most abundant resource, which is human labor.
Welcome to How AI Happens, a podcast where experts explain their work at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. You'll hear from AI researchers, data scientists, and machine learning engineers as they get technical about the most exciting developments in their field and the challenges they're facing along the way. I'm your host, Rob Stevenson, and we're about to learn how AI happens. Joining me today on How AI Happens is the head of AI, labor, and the economy over at the Partnership on AI, Katya Klinova. Katya, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Rob, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so pleased you're on the podcast. I have so many things I want to ask you. Thank you for broadcasting in from Utah, where you are doing like a half work, half vacation stint. Is that right?
Yeah, still work, but rolling into vacation starting next week. So almost there.
That's great. And then when you close your computer at the end of the day, you're in beautiful, countryside of Utah. So that's got to be
beautiful,
nice, right?
Mountains around me. Just absolutely gorgeous here.
Well, great. And I'm glad you took time away from that to record with me. I really do appreciate it. And I have so many questions for you. Before we get too deep in the weeds, though, would you mind telling the folks at home a little bit about your background, and then we can get into the organization Partnership on AI and how you wound up there?
Yeah, sure. My undergrad was in computer science, and I was definitely one of those very enthusiastic, newly minted college graduates who thought that technology is going to change the world, and giving access to computing and information is going to be one of the most democratizing forces around the world, equalizing, bringing opportunity to people, which brought me to work very naturally to Silicon Valley. And after about a decade there, I looked back thinking, wow, there's been a lot of progress in, giving people access to computing and information, cheaper computational platforms. Has that changed a lot in terms of inequality? And what, you see when you start digging into this question is that there are actually more concerns around inequality, including not only inequality between rich and poor countries, but also inequality within countries that previously have been seen as developmental success, and a lot of polarization in the labor market, which is attributed in a lot of ways to technological trends and what kinds of technology is coming into the forefront. So that brought me back to school and gave me motivation to study economics, find people who study poverty and inequality professionally, and find out what was wrong with my 20-year-old theory of change about what technology is going to do in the world, right? And that, then naturally led me to the Partnership on AI, because it's a coalition of now over 100 organizations. It's both technology companies. Over 60% are actually human rights, labor organizations, and as well as academia, united in the pursuit of putting responsible AI practices that many, many organizations have published by now into practice. Into the day-to-day activities. And so the partnership organizes its work by topic areas within responsible AI. So we have groups that work on bias, fairness, accountability, transparency. We have people who work on misinformation, media integrity, people who work on safety topics. And my group works on everything that has to do with labor impacts and economic impact. And it's been a very exciting journey so far.
It's almost a classic story, right? You come out of school fresh-faced, I'm going to change the world, or just in general, technology is going to change the world. And then after a decade, in your case, a few years in the professional sector, you find it is changing the world, but perhaps not in the way I had hoped it did. For you, what was that gap in terms of what you had hoped to see versus what you were seeing?
Yeah, I think being in San Francisco, where I was in the moment when I was having all of these, turning points in my career, is really helpful, because the city is just a quintessential illustration of what inequality can be like. You have a class of uber successful, technological elites, what we came to call them, and then people who truly are being left behind in the most cruel ways, I would say. And then when you realize that San Francisco is a microcosm of that, and actually very often the amazing gains productivity gains that technology enables, they're not being dissipated throughout the economy like they were before. So there is a small sliver of uber profitable companies, and their shareholders, sometimes their employees who are directly employed, do pretty well. But that doesn't necessarily spread throughout the economy in a way that would benefit people as producers and not only as consumers. And of course, the consumer story is something that is being touted by technology companies very often, and deservingly so. Like indeed, we have access to a lot of fantastic free resources or resources that are seemingly free that we don't have to pay for. And computing became much cheaper. Smartphones became much cheaper in the last 10 years. But then what about benefiting people as producers and actually, increasing their productivity and providing access to good jobs that are gainful, that are permanent, that are stable, not precarious? Here, this is where a lot of questions arise, because jobs get displaced or jobs get polarized into the very precarious and the kind of jobs that you really would not want for your kid or for your family member, and the very prestige and high paid ones, but those are really concentrated at the top.
The awareness of that discrepancy led you to go back to school, and then you wound up at Partnership on AI. You shared a little bit about the Partnership on AI in terms of the different teams there, where you're all pointing sort of your expertise. What would you say is kind of the overall mission of the organization?
The overall mission is to make sure the responsible AI principles, and this is my, rendering of it, the responsible AI principles do not stay just beautiful words on a paper or on the web pages of the companies that proclaim them, but actually find their way into practice, into the day-to-day operations of companies and organizations that are developing and deploying AI. And that is done in a thoughtful way, and that is done necessarily with the involvement of communities that stand to be impacted and are being impacted already, with their voices not only being heard, but with them being powerfully brought to the table in an empowered way. So in my case, that means making sure we hear and we listen to and we bring to the table the workers who stand to be impacted, and not only workers of technology companies who right now are in a very privileged position, but also workers who very often get neglected and whose labor is hidden, who are often not employed directly by the technology companies because they are employed through a lot of subsidiaries, or even not at all employed in the technology sector in any shape or form, but yet those technologies they enter the workspaces and they impact the livelihoods and the earning prospects of people around the world who are being impacted but do not have a say in the direction that AI is taking.
An organization's AI considerations are, as you said, merely flowery words on a website, but they don't necessarily have the practical application. What does that look like? What are some of the ways that companies are typically deficient?
It really varies by company and also varies by the topic that we are talking about, because on some of the responsible AI topics, we are further ahead than on others. And for example, there are now much more established fields of both academic inquiry and companies' investment when it comes to fairness and transparency, explainability of AI, and safety of AI. And here, definitely, internal practices within companies range, and it's not like there are no issues. There are issues for sure. But still, it's way further ahead than when it comes to putting into practice some of the economic language that is implicitly or explicitly built into the responsible AI principles. Like, for example, when you read AI should benefit all, or we're building AI that is intended to benefit all. That is actually a very, very lofty economic statement, because what you're saying is that we're not going to be generating losers from technological progress, and we're only going to be generating winners, and it's going to be this Pareto improvement across the board. That has rarely happened in the economic history. Very often when there is a change, technological change, or maybe it's a change to trade policy, there are winners and losers. And there is a question of how do you not forget that you've generated losers and you help them adjust and transition. So creating AI that benefits all is actually it's a very large commitment and a statement. And I don't think many companies have really realized or thought through what they're actually saying in the economic terms when they're subscribing to something like that. But, we are not at all discouraging them from saying that. We believe that AI should be benefiting all. Like, why do we need technology if it's hurting more people than it's benefiting? So the question is, what does it mean to act on this now?
When a company says that, what they're typically saying is, in a world where our product is so widespread that everyone's using it, then the challenge we're setting out to solve will be better for everyone, right? We'll have solved that problem. But again, as you said earlier, it's focused on the consumer and not on the producer. So what are some of the downstream effects on the producer that companies probably don't take into account when they say that our goal is that AI will be helpful to all?
Yeah, it's an excellent question you're asking. The big thing that economists are worrying about, and there is actually a very nice term coined for it by Asimov and Restrepo in their work. They describe it as a threat of so-so technology that is really proliferating. What is so-so technology? It's the kind of technology that automates human labor and human tasks, but generates very little productivity gains to compensate for that. So the way it should work in an idealistic scenario, it's not that you want to avoid all kinds of automation no matter what. That automation at the end of the day has been the force that lifted living conditions and incomes around the world and has been around for much longer than AI. But you want it to be really productive. So then what happens is, yes, you automate some jobs, but you've made the production of those products or services so much more efficient that the prices are now lower, or you enable the creation of new products and services there. And so people now have more money to spend elsewhere because they're saving here on this product and service. And so there will be an increased demand for these other complementary products and services, and there will be additional increased employment there. So people who were displaced in this area where you deployed new technology, they can be now employed somewhere else. Now, if you've displaced people, and yes, as a capitalist, you've shaved some labor costs by doing that, but you've generated really very little productivity gains comparing to when you were when you were producing this same service with human resources. You didn't cut prices. You didn't improve quality very much. So there are no freed up incomes that people are having now that they have to spend elsewhere. So there's not going to be this increased employment somewhere else. And this so-so technology, there is a worry that it's becoming more common. And to give you an example, one example that is often given is a self-checkout kiosk. Before you had a cashier who would check you out. Now you have to do this work yourself as a consumer and spend your own time there. And if it doesn't feel like a lot of time, well, think about the voice support agents and robots that you need to talk with for like half an hour sometimes before you get to resolve your problem or get to speak to an actual human. And this is real time that you could have been spending elsewhere in your actual job, earning something and, creating productive output in the economy. So this is kind of like a double impact on both. You're pushing what used to be a paid labor now onto the consumer. It's now unpaid labor, but you're also hurting the consumer because you're taking their time away from productive activities, right? So these kinds of trends are something to think about and really to pay close attention to. But there is really a lot more with particular capabilities that AI is bringing into the workplace. For example, you can monitor your workers completely now, like every click that they make, even every movement that they make. And that data can be used to automate their work in the future. Now that you are stripping them of the know-how that they possess, of the knowledge by observing everything that they do and training your models on that, does this really make the way we compensate labor now, this model, outdated? Because we compensate people for the task or for their time, but we're not necessarily compensating them for the data that they generate that we use to train models that can displace their jobs in the future. Should they be having a share of that? Should they become shareholders of that future product? This just doesn't exist right now. And this is something that can come to the forefront as more of these technologies get deployed and more of this surveillance really is penetrating the workplace.
Won't there always be so-so technologies so long as there are capitalists? The incentive there is just to make a little bit more money, right?
Yeah, no, completely. There will always be, I think, so technologies. The question is, can we make sure there are more of brilliant technologies that are really bringing breakthroughs in terms of productivity gains? And here there is a lot we can do, both in terms of the private sector and what entrepreneurs that are entering the sector as innovators, what do they aspire to do, what they consider to be cool, what gains them bragging rights, and what investors want to invest in because they see it as high potential. Is it these like petty innovations that just like save some labor cost, or is it something transformational that really brings productivity gains across the board? And also it's a policy question, because if you continue, which is the case now, to tax labor way, way heavier than capital, then of course you're incentivizing a lot of these technologies like this that just like have people think about every little possible way to employ fewer people and shave labor costs.
So on a more micro level, on the level of the individual AI practitioner, what are some questions they can ask themselves about their work, and perhaps when they go out to vendors and to source other data and that sort of thing, how can they ensure that they are not adversely affecting employment terms, or to make sure that they're choosing vendors ethically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So outside of asking, am I creating a so-so technology or a transformational technology that's going to bring productivity gains that augment humans instead of complementing them, there are also just like very important questions that come even before that. And these are questions about, where am I sourcing my data from? And who is labeling this data? And what are the working conditions and what are the payment terms that these professionals are facing? And how am I influencing that? And these are questions that very often do not get asked, because what we observe is that practitioners usually think about it this way. I need a labeled data set. How am I going to get it labeled? They don't necessarily think about it as, how am I going to hire people to label my data set? But one way or another, they end up hiring them directly or indirectly, whether they go to a platform and they set up payments per tasks, or they work with a managed service provider. There are still very real people on the other end actually labeling this data. So thinking about, does the per label price that I'm setting on a platform, does it add up at the end of the day to a living wage? How many of these labels do you actually need to produce per hour, per day, for that to add up to a living wage? Like, does that take into account taking a break for bathroom, for lunch, being a human? Am I thinking about whether the instructions I'm writing are too long or too short, too detailed? Do people even get paid for their time that they spend for reading those instructions? And if I'm trying to, save that time for them, am I making them so short that many of the labels I'm going to end up rejecting and not paying for that work? But that's actually not because labeling professionals did a poor job, but it's because I did a poor job writing instructions that are too short. So all of these questions really end up having impact on the working conditions of people on the other end. And we encourage practitioners to think about them. And we try to put together a guide for that. So, kind of like almost a reminder of what kind of, during what kind of points in your data pipeline work you're actually making decisions that end up impacting data labeling professionals. So we published that as a white paper earlier this year, and it's available to everyone who is interested at our website. I'm gonna share the link with you for the show notes, but it is also partnershiponai.org/responsible-sourcing.
That's great. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. And it just seems like a great, like almost like a checklist you can have as you go out to source vendors. And when you think of the downstream effects of your work, like just reminders of all of these questions you can ask. For example, I had no idea that in the event that a data labeler may have to spin up to speed with a new client, or there's this new request, that time spent reading instructions is uncompensated, right? Which is totally unfair because it's labor, right? And so you apparently, I'm learning right now, need to be deliberate to make sure that that's the case, so that you come by this data honestly, right?
Completely, yeah. I think there are definitely companies that do pay for it, but there are definitely those platforms where this would not be paid. And so if a practitioner is not thinking about these aspects, there's actually right now very little chance that data labelers on their project would end up having a great experience. It doesn't happen automatically today, unfortunately, unless you're working with a really good provider. And I'm really glad that Sama is asking a lot of these questions and thinking about this. Sama has been one of the very first partners we started working with when we were setting out the responsible sourcing project. And it's been a really great collaboration.
I love to hear that. For the folks at home, I promise I didn't ask Katya to say that.
Yeah, you absolutely didn't, but we absolutely love working with Sama, one of our greatest partners.
You are certainly, from what I know about you, Katya, not the kind of person to make that kind of thing up either. So I do appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to ask more about some of the downstream effects of all of this automation that's happening. I speak to people on this show, and a lot of the AI technology being developed is aimed at making people more efficient. Can we automate your low leverage activities? And so you can only focus on the higher leverage activities. At the individual professional level, I can see how that would be valuable. But as it gets more applied at scale, you will see this replacement of traditionally human labor into technology and AI. But I'm curious how you foresee this ongoing automation of human labor in AI affecting employment writ large. And does this shift represent a different change than we've kind of seen historically from various economic trends?
Yeah, I think, very reasonable people would disagree about it. And some would say, look, we've had automation for so long prior to even, first conversations about AI. And it's just normal that some work gets automated, new professions come in their place, and there is this transition. And can be difficult in the moment, but ultimately a good thing. And I agree with that. The question here is, might we be automating too much for the kind of labor market needs that we have right now? Because if you think about it, the main source of income for the majority of human population around the world is their labor. They're selling their labor. This is how they earn living. So it is a pretty important thing. We cannot just be automating all of it away without thinking how people are going to be getting their income. And so what recent research shows is that there is actually a change in the pace of automation and how it relates to the creation of new tasks for humans. So before, everyone who would tell you, well, this is just normal, some jobs get destroyed, some new ones get created, it balances out in the end, they would be right. In the 4 decades following World War II, that's exactly what happened. The volumes matched almost perfectly. And then something changed in the last 3 decades, and really automation has picked up a lot. And now is outpacing the creation of new tasks for humans by quite a bit. The research I'm referencing is a paper by Asimoglu and Restrepo that I can also share for the show notes. And so what that means is that the labor demand, the demand for human labor can be declining overall and faster than we need. Because right now we still have 8+ billion humans in need of jobs around the world, right? And the population hasn't peaked yet. So it's not a time to eliminate all of the jobs that we possibly can. And it's not the time to create machines that can match humans in everything that they do, but that's what we are doing. We are actually using our best talent and best brains to economize on the world's most abundant resource, which is human labor. And that, if you ask me, is just a wasted, innovation. And there is so much of actual scarcities in the world that we need to economize on, that we need technological innovation for when it comes to healthcare, climate change, so many things. But human labor is just not one of them. So why, you would ask, do we have the entire field of AI that uses human parity benchmarks as the main goals to strive for? To create algorithm machines that recognize images as well as humans, that understand speech as well as humans, that, translate speech to text as well as humans. These are just potentially very wrong goals for us to pursue. And we need to be thinking about how do we redirect AI away from this focus, excessive focus on automation, into a focus around complementarity. How do we set targets around human plus AI, human plus machine teams' performance and their productivity?
Yes, you just blew my mind for the second time this episode, talking about how we're trying to recreate the most abundant resource we have, which is human labor. And when you think about making sure that work is distributed and that these 8 billion humans do have a job to do, perhaps it goes hand in hand with AI, and that rather than replacing jobs, it can allow individuals more economic access. Is that, in a microcosm, the goal of the Shared Prosperity Initiative you are undertaking at the Partnership on AI?
Yeah, completely. It is the Shared Prosperity Initiative. Tries to think about how do we address and hopefully prevent the shocks to labor demand and to the shocks to job availability, distribution, and quality that AI can be bringing. And so we really emphasize these questions around just distribution and quality of jobs, because if you've created a bunch of jobs for coastal tech elites, but eliminated a lot of jobs in other areas, or you've eliminated a lot of jobs as lower skill levels that are more accessible to many people around the world, and created more jobs for people with advanced degrees, that does not balance out, because these are not the same populations, and these are not the same people who can just transition from one thing to another as easily. So thinking about the unevenness of these impacts and how we can correct for them, how we can be creating good jobs with AI for the labor force that we actually have and the skills that we actually have, not the skills we wish we had in some, amazing and wonderful, but totally unattainable today future in which everyone is reskilled very easily at no cost, is the big challenge and something that we're trying to strive for with the Shared Prosperity Initiative.
That's great. Katya, I have learned so much from you today. We are creeping up on optimal podcast length here, so I'm going to have to slide into home here. But at this point, I would just say thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all of your knowledge. I've learned a ton from you today, and I'm just really, really pleased you joined the podcast. This has been a great episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
How AI Happens is brought to you by Sama. Sama provides accurate data for ambitious AI, specializing in image, video, and sensor data annotation and validation for machine learning algorithms in industries such as transportation, retail, e-commerce, media, medtech, robotics, and agriculture. For more information, head to sama.com.